Buckle up, folks, because if you've ever wondered how America became the world's biggest reality show, you're about to get a front row seat. We're living in a time where up is down, facts are feelings, and the people who spent 4 years foaming at the mouth about mean tweets are now clutching their pearls over a president daring to criticize his predecessor, and leading the charge, none other than Joy Behar, The View's resident historian who apparently slept through the last decade. Today we're diving into the political circus where the left cries about norms while setting them on fire, and the same crowd that called Trump every name in the book suddenly can't believe a sitting president might throw a jab. Spoiler alert, the only thing Joy's never seen is her own side's hypocrisy. Let's roll the clips and watch the cognitive dissonance in 4K.
Pete!
Yeah.
It's you now.
Yep.
It's you.
Take
There's
responsibility.
nobody else to blame. This is on you. You chose not to go through the proper protocol.
Yeah. Right.
And everybody could have seen this.
Yeah.
This is not the App Store kind of stuff you want to be using.
They also have a tendency to blame the Biden administration.
Yeah.
It's like, move on. That ship has sailed. I never remember in my lifetime a sitting president trashing a previous president. I've never heard that before.
Oh, really?
You never heard,
They
you know,
typically don't
Ronald
do that.
Reagan didn't do it. They're St.
But it's
Ronald.
the common enemy. It's what drives their base together is the other.
Yeah,
so they
that's
do
right.
that to create.
Yeah.
Oh boy, here we go again. The View melting down like a vegan candle factory, this time over the shocking, earth-shattering revelation that a sitting president might criticize a former president. And leading the parade of pearl clutching is Joy Behar, delivering possibly the most historically illiterate statement of the week, which is saying something for that table. Now let's break it down, because the mental gymnastics on display here could qualify for the Olympics. Joy confidently declares, "I never remember in my lifetime a sitting president thrashing a previous president." Now, either Joy's lifetime began in 2016, or she's banking on her audience being too uninformed to call her out, because that claim is objectively false and embarrassingly so. Now, right off the bat, presidents have been slinging mud at their predecessors since ink dried on the Constitution. Barack Obama spent the better part of his first term blaming George W. Bush for, well, pretty much everything, from the economy to foreign policy to the national debt. And he didn't just hint at it. He openly mocked Bush's policies at campaign rallies and press conferences well into his second term. But I guess Joy had the TV on mute back then. Even further back, Bill Clinton threw shade at George H.W. Bush repeatedly, blaming him for the recession of the early 90s. And let's not forget how Joe Biden himself spent most of his presidency demonizing Donald Trump, calling him a threat to democracy, an insurrectionist, and ironically, the very reason America needs to restore its soul. But he said it more like a zombie than I did. But according to Joy, she's never heard a sitting president criticize a former one. Either her hearing aids need new batteries, or she's relying on the rhetorical trick of selective amnesia, only remembering history when it fits her narrative. Now, what's happening here is classic projection and gaslighting. The left spent the entire Trump administration defining their existence by trashing a sitting president. Joy and her co-hosts made a living out of it, dedicating daily segments to calling Trump a dictator, a Nazi, and every other hysterical label they could cook up. But now suddenly criticizing a former president is off limits. That's rich coming from the table that is still playing by the same playbook to this very day. It's also a textbook false equivalence. They're pretending Trump's criticism of Biden, or vice versa, is some unprecedented norm-shattering scandal. It's not. It's politics. The difference is when Trump throws punches, it's called dangerous rhetoric. When the left does it, they call it speaking truth to power. And let's not ignore the underlying emotional manipulation happening here. The entire meltdown is framed as a cry for unity, pretending that Biden's critics are just mean-spirited or divisive. But the left spent 4 years preaching resistance and now suddenly want everyone to move on when it's their guy to blame for literally everything. But the left spent 4 years preaching resistance and then another 4 pretending they were blind, and now suddenly they want everyone to move on when it's their guy in charge. That's not unity. That's naked partisanship. Now, lastly, their entire segment is one big case of projection. The View panel accuses the right of needing a common enemy to unite their base, while their entire show depends on demonizing conservatives, Republicans, and anyone who dares step outside their ideological echo chamber. They don't want less political attacks. They just want a monopoly on them. So let's call it what it is. Joy and the ladies aren't upset that a president criticized a predecessor. They're upset that their guy is getting criticized at all. The real meltdown here isn't about norms. It's about control of the narrative. And the only thing more predictable than their outrage is how historically clueless they are while delivering it. Anyway, shifting gears to Tim Walz, who did a town hall, I guess, down in Texas, and he did what Tim Walz does best, prove that he really loves shoving something down his mouth. If not a shoe, then a tampon. You can only guess.
Election integrity. I hope they all have seen the reports from cybersecurity experts that they've released analyses of election data out of Clark County, Nevada, that shows some pretty convincing evidence of election tampering. My biggest fear is that we're not going to make it to the midterms. So what can we do to make sure, A, that the midterms actually happen, and B, that they're free of fraud?
Yeah. This one's the core. We saw just recently Donald Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically to women, trying to make it more difficult for women to be able to vote. We see one of the first things they do is try and restrict the vote. This is one of the things, though, that this is going to take power to the streets. And I don't know what the answer is on this.
Well, here we go again. Another day, another Democrat casually tossing around wild conspiracy theories while pretending to be the moral authority on election integrity. This time, it's Minnesota Governor Tim Walz nodding along like a bobblehead while a woman spouts baseless claims about the 2024 election being rigged, with some vague reference to cyber reports out of Clark County, Nevada, that she never actually cites or explains. Because who needs evidence when you've got vibes? Now, first, notice the rhetorical sleight of hand. This woman confidently references cybersecurity experts and analyses of election data without naming a single expert, report, or source. That's called appeal to authority without evidence. She wants you to trust some anonymous experts without providing a shred of verifiable information, because the goal isn't to inform, it's to sow doubt while sounding credible enough to get away with it. Then she shifts straight to the fear-mongering, saying, "My biggest fear is that we're not going to make it to the midterms." Translation: she's not interested in facts. She's setting up a doomsday narrative so her side can justify whatever tantrum they're planning next. It's pure emotional manipulation. When you can't win the argument with facts, you make people scared enough to stop thinking critically. Now, here's where it really goes off the rails. Tim Walz, the sitting Democrat governor of Minnesota and former vice presidential candidate, instead of correcting this woman or urging her to look at actual verified election audits, immediately pivots to a bizarre, unrelated accusation that Donald Trump signed an executive order to make it harder for women to vote. That's an outright lie. No such executive order exists. Walz doesn't cite it because it never happened. This is a classic straw man fallacy, fabricating an imaginary villain to rally the crowd and distract from the fact that the person in front of him is spouting delusions. Now, even worse, Walz finishes by saying, "This is going to take power to the streets." I don't know what the answer is. That's code for incitement. He's openly endorsing unrest based on fabricated claims of election fraud, exactly the thing Democrats claim to be horrified by when it's Republicans questioning elections. The hypocrisy here is so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Now let's talk context. These are the same people who spent 4 years calling Donald Trump a threat to democracy for questioning the 2020 election, while they themselves spent all of 2016 and beyond screaming Russia rigged the election. They wrote books about it. They launched investigations. Hillary Clinton herself still claims the election was stolen from her. But when their side questions an election, suddenly it's brave and concerning. This entire exchange is a textbook case of projection. Walz and his base accuse Republicans of undermining democracy while they peddle conspiracy theories about Clark County and invent executive orders out of thin air. It's also a perfect example of moving the goalposts. When the facts don't back up their narrative, they simply invent new crises and demand action based on fiction. So let's make it absolutely clear. The real election rigging here isn't happening in Nevada data files. It's happening right in front of you in broad daylight with public officials normalizing paranoia, misinformation, and soft incitement, because if the game isn't rigged in their favor, they'll burn down the rule book entirely.
Sammy, thank you. And to all the young people who are here, I just pause for a moment and look around And look at, I'm especially talking about these old white guys who seem to disappoint us on a regular basis in this country.
You know, nothing says progress like a sitting Democrat governor casually dumping on an entire demographic base solely on their age, race, and gender. Here we have Tim Walz, the proud progressive leader of Minnesota, standing in front of a crowd of young people. Young, I put that in quotes because the majority of them, if you really look, are old, on the old boomer side. Anyway, he's openly declaring that old white guys disappoint us on a regular basis. Imagine for 1 second if any Republican governor stood at a podium and swapped out old white guys for any other race, gender, or age group. The outrage machine would break the sound barrier. Now, let's unpack the rhetorical dumpster fire Walz just delivered. First, this is classic collective guilt. Instead of judging individuals on merit, action, or character, Walz lazily lumps an entire group together and assigns them moral failure. This is identity politics 101. Reduce people to their skin color and age so you can pre-package them as villains without having to engage their ideas. It's not just lazy, it's fundamentally bigoted. Second, notice the cowardly virtue signaling he deploys. He's not actually saying anything substantive. There's no policy discussion, no solutions, no specifics, just an empty pandering swipe at a politically safe target in the left's echo chamber. It's performance, pure and simple. Walz is standing there like the cool teacher trying to win over the class by bashing the old principal, except the principal in this case is half the country's population. And let's not overlook the glaring hypocrisy here. Walz himself is a middle-aged, actually pretty old white man, rapidly approaching the demographic he's mocking. Actually, he is in it. He owes his entire career to the very political system built and maintained by old white guys, from the Constitution to the party machine that installed him. But sure, let's pretend he's bravely fighting the man while being the man. On a deeper level, this is straight up cultural projection. Walz and his ilk constantly accuse the right of division and discrimination while simultaneously standing on a stage stereotyping an entire group based on traits they can't control. If you replace old white guys with young black men or Latina women, he'd be run right out of the Democrat Party. But when the target is white and male, it's suddenly trendy and acceptable. And what's the real purpose of his rhetoric? It's not to spark serious debate. It's to create an easy scapegoat so Walz and his crowd don't have to confront their own failures. The skyrocketing crime in Democrat-run cities, the collapsing public education systems, and the soaring cost of living. No, it's easier to blame the old white guy boogeyman while pretending the progressive elite isn't the one holding the steering wheel. So let's call this out for what it is. Cheap, divisive pandering masquerading as moral clarity. Walz isn't fighting oppression, he's manufacturing it. One lazy stereotype at a time, because it's easier than fixing the actual problems his party created. If you want to talk about disappointment, Governor, start with the people in power, like yourself, who weaponize identity politics to cover their own incompetence, like you. Spoiler alert, you might want to have a sharp look at the mirror.
So, I think, and I'm going to own this, when we see people back off and we see corporations back off to the threats, instead of leaning into and knowing we're doing this, because it's not only morally the right thing to do, it's economically the right thing to do, and our culture proves that our strength is our diversity. We've been talking about this for years as a country of immigrants, and we let them define the issue on immigration. We let them define the issue on DEI, and we let them define what woke is. We got ourselves in this mess because we weren't bold enough to stand up and say, you damn right we're proud of these policies. We're going to put them in, and we're going to execute them.
Oh, this is rich. Tim Walz out there in Texas preaching to a crowd about how the left's catastrophic failures on immigration, DEI, and so-called woke policies aren't actually the problem. It's that they just haven't shoved them down our throats hard enough. This is the equivalent of a chef burning the meal, blaming the customers, and declaring the solution is to just turn up the heat and make the meat harder. Now, Walz starts out with the classic false premise that diversity and DEI policies are inherently morally right and economically right, as if that's an objective truth. No data, no qualifiers, no evidence, just assertion. This is what's called begging the question. He assumes what he's trying to prove, presenting diversity quotas and corporate social engineer as unquestionable goods without addressing the glaring real-world consequences we've all witnessed. Declining academic standards, hiring practices that prioritize identity over competence, essentially racism, and the public backlash that's now toppling DEI bureaucracies everywhere. Then he claims that the left let them define the issue on immigration and DEI. No, Governor, the right didn't define anything. The right reacted to what your side actually did. Wide open open borders, millions pouring in illegally, sanctuary city policies backfiring spectacularly, and race essentialist DEI mandates bleeding into every school, corporation, and government office. When Texas is overrun by illegal crossings, when blue cities are slashing public services because they're overwhelmed by non-citizens, that's not a narrative problem. That's a reality problem. Walz also trots out the tired phrase, "We're a country of immigrants." Cute slogan, bro, but deliberately misleading. We are indeed a country built by immigrants, legal immigrants who went through a process, pledged allegiance to the nation, and entered under the rule of law. What happened under Biden wasn't immigration. It was mass illegal entry encouraged by the very policies Walz wants to double down on. Pretending there's no difference is intellectual dishonesty at its finest. And then comes the kicker, the martyr complex. According to Walz, it's not the policies that failed, it's that Democrats weren't bold enough in forcing them on the public. This is classic doubling down on failure. The house is on fire, and instead of grabbing a hose, he's yelling that the flames wouldn't have spread if they just used more gasoline. Now, what Walz is really doing here is trying to rebrand authoritarianism as moral courage. He wants to frame the backlash against woke extremism as cowardice on the left's part, when in reality, it's the public rejecting policies that have destroyed meritocracy, trampled free speech, destabilized American cities, and undone some of the fabric of what makes this nation so great. His speech is riddled with emotional manipulation, and notice how he never cites a single fact, stat, or case study to back up why DEI and unlimited immigration are economically right. He just asserts it and relies on the audience's guilt, fear, and herd mentality to carry him across the finish line. And let's not miss the irony. Walz is standing in Texas, a state that nearly buckled under the weight of the immigration crisis his party created, lecturing Texans that the problem isn't the border, but that Democrats haven't been aggressive enough in enforcing their disastrous policies. That's not leadership, that's straight up delusion. So here's the truth. Americans aren't rejecting diversity or inclusion. They're rejecting the weaponization of identity politics that divide, control, and erode basic standards. They're rejecting open borders that endanger communities. And they're rejecting smug career politicians like Tim Walz who think the answer to every problem is more government control, more quotas, and more gaslighting. If you want to know why this country's fed up, Governor, you don't need to look at Republican messaging. You need to look in the mirror. Look, at the end of the day, this isn't just about Tim Walz, DEI talking points, and some desperate attempt to rebrand failure as virtue. It's about how easily the political class thinks they can manipulate you with empty slogans and moral preening. They expect you to ignore what you see with your own eyes, to forget the chaos at the border, the decay in cities, the division in classrooms, and swallow the lie that the problem isn't the policy, it's you for noticing. So ask yourself, how many times have you been told you're the problem for questioning the people in charge? How often are you expected to sit quietly while the very people breaking the system tell you they just need more power to fix it? At what point do you stop accepting the excuse that the fire keeps spreading because the arsonist didn't light the matches? These aren't just political games. They're attempts to rewrite reality itself. And the only question left is whether you're willing to keep buying what they're selling. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.